Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with you on this 9th of October, a Wednesday. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information, and you can always find that on the Alaska Weather Information Line, 1-800-472-0391. Our weather.gov/Alaska page is available online anytime. A simple click on the map will get you to your local forecast information from your weather forecast office in Juneau, Fairbanks, or Anchorage. You can also find us on social media, facebook.com/NWS Juneau, NWS Fairbanks, and NWS Anchorage. And you can also look up tsunami information and information from the Alaska Pacific River Forecast Center. If you can't find what you're looking for, please let me know. david.snider@noaa.gov is an easy way to find me, an email. Happy to answer weather questions, take a look at the pretty pictures from your part of Alaska, or just have a nice dialogue about what you're seeing on the show, or perhaps what you'd like to see. Let me know. I'm happy to do what I can anytime I can. Here's a look at the hazardous weather situation across the region. We're watching for the potential of some higher winds across the northern Gulf and into the outer coast as we head into Thursday and Friday. It does look like there will be some gales, maybe even some storm force winds, as an area of low pressure cranks up just outside of Cordova and southwest of Yakutat. This is also going to be capable of producing some heavier rainfall. And my concern would simply be on top of previous heavy rains that you've already experienced in northern parts of southeast and in toward Yakutat. Another round of that, probably not that great. Watch for the potential of some localized flooding if that shapes up. But right now, the first concern is going to be the potential for some higher winds as we get into tomorrow night and into Friday. Snow is still falling across the interior. Most of that's fairly light at this point. Around the Fairbanks region, in fact, temperatures have warmed up enough for that precipitation to become all rain, with readings in the 40s. The eastern Alaska range, though, is still looking at some stronger wind gusts. The winds around 50 miles per hour should be expected through the remainder of the afternoon. That'll gradually taper off this evening, and snow still falling. With that and a little bit of snow, a winter weather advisory remains in effect through the remainder of the afternoon. For the Susitna Valley, a new winter weather advisory has been posted for as much as 4 to 8 inches. This is generally for the area north of Talkeetna, and again, mainly going to focus on the areas around Broad Pass. So 4 to 8 inches of snow possible as you head up north of Talkeetna, and really a lot of that will be west of the Parks Highway as well. A couple inches there around the Broad Pass region, maybe as much as 4. Into the Copper River Valley, it's possible to see a little bit of snow as well. Look for traveling conditions to change to more of that winter mode. So if you're going on the Richardson, you're going on the Parks, especially if you continue headed northward through the eastern Alaska Range or north from Talkeetna, time to start thinking about winter. If you haven't done the tire changeover yet, or you don't have winter survival gear in the back of your car, now's the time to do that. Now is the time to prepare before you head out on the road heading northward for tonight. Looking at the satellite picture across the region, low pressure is working across the interior right now. You can see that pulling up a great deal of moisture coming in from the south and west over Kodiak Island across the northern Gulf, and some of that again heading for northern parts of southeast. Across the interior, we see that wraparound cloud cover across the northwest, a little bit of a break with high pressure setting up across the central and western Bering Sea and all the way into the North Pacific, and already the next wave of low pressure working in off the Kamchatka Peninsula. As that's traveling eastward, we'll continue to see wave after wave after wave working from west to east. Every about 2 to 3 days is when these are coming through. This one's fairly mild right now across South Central, but if you got a sneak peek when the clouds broke up around the region, just about any part of higher terrain in Alaska is looking at fresh layers of white at higher elevations there. So a pretty picture, but certainly one that is wanting to be winter very quickly, with high pressure just west of the Gulf of Anadyr at 1,030 millibars. You can see that ridge extending all the way down through the central chain at 1,034 millibars. That is pushing in some cooler air, and that's wrapping into the northwestern parts of the state all the way down to southwest. And right now, all of this is being reported as rain from the observations around the sensors, but around Broad Pass, we do know it's snow. Most of what was falling across the interior at Lower Train, where most of us are living, is showing up as rainfall right now on the sensors, and periods of rain passing through south central and Kenai Peninsula and Prince William Sound. Occasional brief heavy downpours with that, but most of that seems to be more of a moderate rainfall. Out across the northern parts of southeast, some light rain reported there, and high pressure found once again on the other side of all of this unsettled weather across most of the state. That's around 1,034 millibars. Now, as we go ahead into tonight, a new player moves into the western Bering at 995 millibars. That next front is marching quickly across the western Bering. The ridge of high pressure will slow it down just a little bit, but it is pushing in some colder weather, and it looks like some of the rain across the west will turn over to more of a light snow for the Koyukuk Valley, the Yukon Delta, all the way into Kotzebue Sound, where there's still enough warm air lingering near the coast One benefit there of having a coastal location is that the ocean water does moderate the temperature somewhat upward. However, if you're looking for things to freeze up quickly, that may not be so quick, as temperatures in the ocean are running fairly warm right now. So again, a rain-snow mix possible around Norton Sound and Kotzebue Sound. Up across the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast, areas of light snow are possible. Around the interior, rain and snow mix may be possible. And then we start to get into these triple dots across the northern Gulf. That is a deep fetch of southerly moisture working into the northern Gulf, and moderate to heavy rain, which is what the three dots mean, heavy rain. More likely from areas from Cordova all the way out toward Yakutat and perhaps into parts of Cross Sound. As we get into Thursday, it does look like snow showers will continue across the higher train of the Alaska Range northward. Showery snow across the Brooks Range, and then more likely to see some IFR conditions in areas of light snow and probably fog around the Beaufort Seacoast and even the Chukchi with that northwest flow. Notice that high pressure doesn't really move around the Gulf of Anadyr. So what's going to have to happen is low pressure is going to drop in between this and run through a more stable region of air. That'll probably chip away at the leading edge of precipitation and slow that low pressure system down just a bit. But on top of this, the driving force is a very strong northwesterly jet stream, and that should help to push this through and reorganize it once it gets through that more stable zone of high pressure. Across the Gulf, the low there is having no problem whatsoever. In fact, it will be strengthening as we head into Thursday night and Friday. And as this travels northward, it looks like it will intensify, keeping the focus for heavy rain across the northern Gulf and probably intensifying the winds here as well. What we see in these situations is usually an indication that these winds coming in from the east and southeast across the northern Gulf will develop what is more of a local jet stream, but lower to the surface, and that could produce some very strong gales, maybe even storm force winds very close to the coast, but just offshore. Not a place you want to be, though, as this system is moving closer to the mountains. So we're going to watch for that to happen, but it does look like the winds are coming up across the outer coast and the northern Gulf, and like we said, a high wind watch is posted for that possibility. As we get into Friday, you can see the low there at 988 millibars, the front squeezing those winds right up against the coast and the coastal range for sure. Periods of heavy rain possible, periods of strong winds are possible. Gusts there could reach over 60 miles per hour. And easterly parts of the Alaska Range looking at more snow. In the wake of this, we'll probably have showery conditions around Cook Inlet and winds coming in from the north and west. It will be breezy around Cook Inlet as this passes, and low pressure trying to work through that stable region of air in the west is having a little bit of difficulty, but it will reorganize at 1,005 millibars there. Clouds and showers likely again across the Aleutians and parts of Bristol Bay, with periods of rain and snow across the northwestern coast. As you look at the temperatures quickly, overnight lows in southeast in the 30s and 40s, south central in the mid-30s it looks like, 40 in Kodiak, 31 around Fairbanks, teens and 20s for some of our Brooks Range villages, including Arctic Village at 14. 31 around Utqiagvik, 20s for the Beaufort Seacoast, 30 in Nome Southwest, close to freezing. St. Paul about 36. High temperatures on Thursday, back in the upper 40s and lower 50s. Sitka 51, about the same for Gustavus and Glacier Bay, 52 around Yakutat. Closer to the upper 40s to nearly 50 degrees in Prince William Sound. Again, it could be wet and windy. 40s for South Central and the Cook Inlet region, Matanuska Valley locations, including Palmer and Wasilla, all the way up to Talkeetna, still in the 40s, 35 in Fort Yukon, and 36 for Ambler.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And moving on to aviation now, IFR concerns will continue across the interior, all the way around the Alaska Range and down through the Matanuska Valley into Prince William Sound and parts of northern sections of southeast, with MVFR even further south than that into the central panhandle. Out west, you can see a break here, and this is all ahead of the next wave of low pressure that's working in. We'll have another one as we move into the weekend. You can see by Thursday afternoon a broad area of IFR sweeping through the central Aleutians, but on either side of that, only MVFR conditions are expected, and even some VFR breaks as you head up into the Bering Strait. Across the central and eastern interior, we expect IFR to continue through the afternoon hours, and a lot of that will stretch up into the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast, with IFR across northern parts of the Gulf, MVFR limited to northern parts of southeast, and maybe even some improvement across central and southern parts of southeast as we go. For the afternoon on Friday, you can see the effects of low pressure again across the western Bering, dragging in that low ceiling and visibility across the region, with MVFR across a large part of the Aleutians, the Alaska Peninsula into parts of Bristol Bay, mainly the outer sections, as well as the southwestern Capes. Look for IFR across the Brooks Range and into the coastal plain, MVFR across our northern coastal villages, and IFR conditions across the Alcan border into northern parts of the Gulf and across the outer coast of southeast, with Chilkoot and White Pass expected to see IFR lingering into Friday morning. Marginal conditions will continue southward into the inside passage, and that becomes IFR as we go into Friday afternoon. That will stretch up into the Alcan border and the parts of the Yukon as well. And marginal conditions across the North Slope. Look for extended areas of VFR by the afternoon on Friday for the Yukon Valley all the way down to the southwest. Bristol Bay, Shelikof Strait, south central looking for a better day in the afternoon. And out west you can see the next round of IFR really starting to spin up across the central and western Bering and across the eastern Aleutians as we go through the day. Here's your pass conditions in detail now. For your Thursday, IFR concerns will continue for Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass as we would expect. Marginal conditions for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass to start with a lean over toward IFR as we go. Rainy Pass expected to see IFR conditions as we go throughout the day. Marginal to start though. Windy Pass looking to hold on to IFR throughout your entire day. Isabel Pass, we're looking for IFR expected there really all day long. Thursday, Mentasta looking for marginal conditions. Tanita Pass, we expect to see instrument flight rule all day long as rain continues to be an issue. And Portage, IFR concerns there with MVFR perhaps by the afternoon as weather starts to improve in the south. Chilkoot and White Pass should lean over to marginal conditions after an IFR start on Thursday. Your freezing levels show that cooler air is making inroads into south and western parts of Alaska as well as the eastern interior, but it just can't punch into the Gulf all the way just yet. This, of course, will change in a matter of months. But out to the west, you see a 2,000-foot freezing line around the Pribilofs, and that's pushing southward slowly. But already the next wave of warmth is building into the west, and levels there rising from 8 to about 10,000 feet. Across southeast, levels stretch from as low as 2,000 feet, and the surface freezing line not too far north from that, to about 6,000 to 8,000 feet around Haida Gwaii in the Dixon entrance. Icing potential shows levels are holding about where they were yesterday. For tomorrow, it looks like anywhere from about 3,000 to 4,000 feet from the Yukon Valley northward, and about 3,000 to 6,000 feet across the southern third of Alaska there. Most of that will be a little bit higher, a little more isolated as you move further and further south-southeast. Generally, it looks like about 3,000 to 6,000 feet across the northern parts of the Panhandle into Yakutat and the northern Gulf. Levels there again concentrating around isolated moderate threats. And out to the west, with freezing levels coming up, the icing potential starts to go down. You'll have to go even further up to 8,000 feet or higher to get into that icing threat. Here's our jet stream now, and you can see low pressure across the western Gulf, a stronger area of low pressure moving across the Aleutians, 70 to 80 knots. But the main corridor right now is coming in from the north and west, right along the western coastline and just west of the Bering Strait. That's running as high as 90 to 110 knots, and then coming in from the south sharply into areas around Icy Cape and Cape Fairweather around 120 knots. So a broad area of low pressure right now in control of Alaska. And you can see that trough reflected at 9,000 feet. A little bit of a ridge developing here across the central Bering and then back into the next trough there across the west. Deep southerly flow will keep rainfall going and help to spin up that next weather system in the northern Gulf toward the end of the week. At 3,000 feet, winds in from the northwest around 10 to 15 knots. Not terribly strong there right now. More of a westerly flow for the Beaufort, and then our next weather system out here across the central and western chain, bringing us 20 to 40 knot winds across the west, and some stronger winds coming in across the eastern Gulf. You'll notice wind speeds over Haida Gwaii only 15 knots, but a little bit closer to southeast and into the northern parts of the Gulf. Levels there anywhere from 45 to 60 knots as we go into Thursday. So we are expecting some wind to build up here across the northern parts of the Gulf and across the outer coast of southeast. Watch that for more. Turbulence will certainly be there tomorrow, and the potential for some isolated severe shouldn't be ruled out, but for right now, considerable moderate below 4,000 feet up and down the outer coast and also across Shelikof Strait into parts of southwestern Alaska.
Technology. It's the rhythm of our everyday life. We're more dependent on satellite and communication systems than at any other time in history. Disruptions can affect our economy and even our safety. To prepare for the effects of such events and minimize impacts, we need to look outside our atmosphere, some 93 million miles away, at a star we call the Sun. It's our main energy source. It warms the Earth and grows our food. While the Sun and the space between may seem pleasant from our perspective, it's anything but peaceful. At its surface exists a chaotic state of eruptions and radiation. And unlike Vegas, what happens at the Sun doesn't stay at the Sun.
Space weather is essentially emissions from the Sun radiation, magnetic field that erupts from the solar surface, pumped out into space, sometimes right towards Earth. When it impacts the Earth, it impacts our technology. That's what we call space weather.
These solar events and their effects at Earth can disrupt systems we take for granted. From causing blackouts to the power grid, to delaying offshore drilling operations due to inaccurate GPS data. Interference with communication systems can force air traffic to reroute and impact rescue response and coordination. Outside our atmosphere, solar radiation can harm astronauts and the systems they depend on. The good news is that these eruptions can be detected early. Forecasters at the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado, have their eyes on the sun at all times.
The Space Weather Prediction Center is part of the National Weather Service and is very much like a normal weather forecast office. We're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're looking at data, we're looking at imagery, we're looking at model outputs. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches of imminent activity to our customers so they can take action.
In many ways, forecasting space weather is a lot like forecasting hurricanes. Those who rely on space weather forecasts, like electric power grid managers, are informed early on and can begin taking protective action.
When we see an eruption on the sun, space weather forecasters will issue a watch. This is much like a hurricane watch. When a hurricane sits offshore of Miami, for example, perhaps 48 hours out, we too can see way in advance that something may be coming towards the Earth.
As the storm moves toward us, it hits a monitoring spacecraft orbiting 1 million miles away from Earth.
It's kind of our buoy sitting out there offshore, and that hurricane, about 30-45 minutes before it makes landfall, we'll get the measurements from the buoy. That's what this spacecraft does for us. That big eruption that left the sun hits the spacecraft. Now we've got the measurements of exactly what's going to impact us here on Earth, and we issue the warnings to give the power grid a heads up that the storm is now imminent. An interesting element to this whole process is that when the forecasters issue the alert, the power grid receives the alert, takes the necessary actions to protect the grid, and the average citizen never knows anything ever happened.
The number of customers who rely on space weather information continues to grow. As our reliance on technology increases, so will our need for constant monitoring of the sun.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
GPS has changed society. Most people don't realize how remarkable and how many different applications there are.
The GPS has become an integral part, not just of our daily lives as far as cell phones and guidance for our cars and mapping, but the whole system in agriculture is really relying heavily on high accuracy GPS.
So they're using GPS to plant those seeds with centimeter accuracy. And then they can come behind it and irrigate and fertilize right where that seed is with that 1 centimeter accuracy.
The GPS creates a line for the operator that he can steer along, or you go to another level and the operator doesn't steer anymore and the tractor has an automatic steering system on it, much like a cruise control on a car, except for when I push the button, it doesn't drive a set speed. When I push a button, it stays on a predefined line.
You don't even need lights. You can do it at nighttime. You program your GPS and it's driving that tractor for you. So it's huge, and it's changing the way that the farmers farm the fields.
6 or 7 days out.
There's an interest in GPS applications from space weather side because when the sun is eruptive, it causes GPS to falter, and in some cases it doesn't work at all.
Productivity may suffer to a certain degree in that there's no way that I as a human being can steer as good 8 hours a day as a GPS system's going to do. It's going to be the same all day long. Some of the other application technologies, those are going to be gone. We're not going to have the ability to do good section control on sprayers and planters and fertilizer applicators without GPS.
We see a huge growing customer base in so many different industries, so many different sectors now relying on GPS and high precision GPS. They're all big customers for us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with your marine weather now, and again, apologize for the strange ice map. We'll have the old one back to you, but what we can tell you is that new ice is growing along that marginal ice zone. That's what you see in blue. This is sea ice concentration. The red areas into the orange are the higher concentration areas, and again, we still have a patch of ice that's kind of advecting around in the Beaufort Gyre and seeing new growth along that outer edge, but keep in mind, this is still several hundred miles north of both AKwx and AKwx. For the very latest sea ice information, anytime, head to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. In southeast, the winds are coming up in the next couple days. An area of low pressure will be fairly strong here across the northern Gulf. Do expect gales. Won't be surprised to see storms across the outer coast, and high wind watches are posted across the land areas as we get into Thursday and Friday because of that. Gusts coming up to 45 knots in the Lynn Canal, 40 knots inside of Stevens Passage, and seas also coming up 4 to 6 feet on the inside, looking at 8 to maybe as high as 12, even 13 feet on the outside. By Friday, the front will push into the inside passage there. The winds staying from the south across the inside, anywhere from 25 to 35 sustained, gust to 40 again in Stevens Passage. And look for that westerly shift across the Gulf, which much higher seas offshore, some of those reaching over 20 to 25 feet. Closer to the coast, 20 to about 22, maybe 23 feet, looking for winds at 30 to 40 knots sustained throughout your day on Friday. For South Central, winds coming in strong from the east inside of Prince William Sound, 6-foot seas there, a north and westerly flow over the Barrens, 30 knots with 8 to 9-foot seas. Winds not so bad across the northern part of the inlet, only 1-foot seas there on a 10-knot wind, 15 knots coming into the region from Kenai all the way down through Clam Gulch into Kachemak Bay, 3-foot seas there in the southern Cook Inlet region. Winds come up sharply on Friday, again with low pressure cranking up east of Cordova and west of Yakutat. We expect to see northwesterlies coming out of Prince William Sound with 6-foot seas on the inside, 16-foot seas on the outside, and 15 to 18-foot seas there outside of the Kenai Fjords region and Resurrection Bay. Northwesterlies breezy in the northern inlet, 15 knots and 2-foot seas there. Thursday in Bristol Bay, 20 knots all the way down the Alaska Peninsula coastline in the Bering, 6 to 8-foot seas on that 20-knot wind. West and northwesterlies through Shelikof Strait over Kodiak Island and down the bays and passes all the way down through Sandpoint, 25 to 30, looking for 6 to 8-foot seas on Thursday. And again, a little bit more of a west and southwesterly shift developing on the southern end of the peninsula. The strongest winds and highest seas out over the Gulf. We'll still have some blustery conditions over Kodiak Island, though, on Friday. 25 to 35 knots, 7-foot seas in Shelikof with 13-foot seas east of Akiak and Kodiak. Southerly winds across the central and western Aleutians for Thursday, 30 to 35. Expect 9 to as high as 15-foot seas as we get into Thursday. Northwesterlies on the other side of the ridge there. Winds will be fairly light, 15 to 20, looking for 5 to 7-foot seas on Thursday. And that returns to more of a south and westerly flow, 25 to 30 knots on Friday. 10 to 12 foot seas on the Pacific coast, and anywhere from 7 to 9 feet seas there in the central chain, 11 to 13 feet developing out on Friday. For the west coast, northerlies coming in behind low pressure again in the Gulf. That's strengthening. 15 to 25 north of McCormick and around St. Matthew, looking for 6 to 7 foot seas there. 6 to 7 foot seas on slower winds for most areas around St. Paul to St. George. Northwesterlies in the Kuskokwim Delta with a 7 foot sea, and northerlies inside Norton Sound, 20 knots and a 4 foot sea on Thursday. Winds diminished there on Friday, looking for 3 to 4 foot seas, but an offshore flow is developing north of Etolan Strait and McCormick with 10 foot seas strengthening ahead of low pressure that will be out to your west and southwest at this point. 10 foot seas around St. Matthew, southerlies in St. Paul and St. George with an 8 foot sea there on a 20 knot wind. For the north slope, look for a westerly flow, light 10 to 15 knots, 4 to 6 foot seas there all the way out toward Point Barrow, and a northwesterly onshore flow into Kotzebue Sound and the Chukchi coast with 6 foot seas on a 15 to 20 knot wind. We're looking for a little bit more of a westerly flow strengthening across the northern seas, anywhere from 15 to 20 knots there on Friday. Northwesterlies remain inside of Kotzebue Sound with a 4 foot sea there as we close out the week. Recapping tonight's weather, winter weather advisories continue just a little while longer for the eastern Alaska Range and will continue overnight into early tomorrow morning for areas north of Talkeetna in the Susitna Valley, mainly looking at Broad Pass and areas west of the Parks Highway. West of the Parks Highway, about 4 to 8 inches of snow may be possible. Into Broad Pass, we're looking at about more to 2 to 4 inches of snow. Also looking for areas around the Richardson Highway passes into the Alaska Range, expecting some light accumulations. Short story is if you're driving on Alaska Range roads and passes tonight, plan for wintry weather, especially if you're going into the interior. For the northern Gulf Coast, periods of moderate to heavy rain will develop. Some of those could bring some high winds from areas in the northern panhandle out toward Yakutat and Cordova as we go into Thursday night and Friday. And another wave of low pressure is strengthening out there in the southern Bering as we head toward the weekend. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.